Welcome to Lecto. Today we are going to discuss different components of the spinal cords and the different spinal nerves that arise from the spinal cord. So let's start. First of all, we will discuss the different general components of the spinal cord. Before we discuss, we should know the basic difference between the gray matter and the white matter. So here you can see that the basic neuron or nerve cell consists of three components. First one is the dendrites, cell body and axon. These are basically the three components of the cell body. So here you can see in the white matter you will see the axon. Axon lie in the white matter and dendrites and cell body actually lie in the gray matter. So if you see here that this is actually the axon, and here you can see this one. So this is the cell body, and above the cell body you will see the different dendrites, and here is the axonal region, or you can say axon. So this is axon lie in the white matter and dendrites and the cell body lie in the gray matter. So this is the thing. And you also know the difference between the nucleus and the ganglia, tracts and the nerves. So here you can see that as we know that we divide the nervous system into two. We divide nervous system into two: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. In central nervous system we see the brain and the spinal cord, and in peripheral nervous system we only see the different nerves. So if you see the collection of the cell body, here is the difference. If you see the collection of the cell body in the central nervous system, then it is called the nucleus. When you see the collection of the cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, then you call it ganglia. So this is the case. Now the basic difference between the nucleus and the ganglia is now clear. Now next is the difference between tracts. So if you see the collection of the axon, I'm talking about axon. So if you see the collection of axon in the central nervous system, then it is called the tracts. And if you see the collection of the axon in the peripheral nervous system, then it is called the nerve. So this is basically the difference between the tracts and the nerves. So next, move forward. So here you can see that this is the cross-sectional area of the spinal cord, right? And in that situation, you see this is the anterior side, or you can say ventral side, and this is the dorsal side, or you can say posterior side. So at the anterior side you see a deep depression. So actually this depression is called this depression is called the anterior median fissure. So this is the anterior median fissure because it is present at the anterior side. Okay, it is present at the middle of the spinal cord, so we call it median, and it is deep inside, so we call it fissure. So on the opposite side, on the posterior side, you will see a small groove here, and this small groove is called the posterior median sulcus. Now the basic difference: fissure is a deep groove, but the sulcus is a shallow groove. So this is actually the basic difference. Now if you see that this depression, or you can say fissure, support the artery. So here in them you will see the artery, and it is this artery is basically the median or you can say median spinal artery lie in the anterior median fissure. So here is the thing. Now you see the four sulcus at the corners of the spinal cord, right? And in that situation, you see these and the sulcus that are present on the posterior side, they are called the posterolateral sulcus. Here are basically the two posterolateral sulcus. And at the anterior side, you also see here, there are two sulcus. And they are called the anterolateral sulcus, because they are present at the anterior and the lateral side. So we called it anterolateral sulcus. So these are basically the different. Now these sulcus are basically divide the white matter into different components. So at the periphery you see the white matter, and at the center you see the butterfly shaped gray matter. So actually these sulcus that are present at the corner posterolateral and anterolateral divide the white matter into different components. So here you can see here this side, at the front side, this one. Now this portion of the white matter is called the anterior funiculus. This is called the anterior funiculus. This portion is actually called the anterior funiculus. What is the funiculus? What is mean by the funiculus? Funiculus is actually a collection of the different axons. So as we discussed that the white matter contain the axon. So it's mean the funiculus that are actually the collection of the axon will be present at the white matter. So at what side? At the anterior side. If the funiculus present at the anterior side, then I say it is the anterior funiculus. So next, if you see, here is the lateral side, and here are basically the two lateral sides. So this is called the funiculus that are present at the lateral side. So I say that this is the lateral funiculus. Because, and you will see the both sides. And last, if you see at the posterior side, you see here, this is the posterior funiculus. So here are basically the different funiculus: anterior, lateral, and the posterior funiculus. So if you notice that at the posterior side you see a septum. That divide the spinal cord. So this septum is actually called the posteromedian septum. This is called the this septum is actually called the posteromedian septum, because it is present at the posterior side. Okay, middle of the spinal cord. Okay, so that's why posterior median, and septum because it divides the spinal cord into two. So this is the posterior median septum. So this is the case. And if you see that here is a junction. Here is a junction between the right side of the spinal cord and the left side of the spinal cord, and this junction is actually called the anterior commissure. So this portion, I am talking about this portion. Here is actually a junction, and this junction is actually called the anterior commissure. Commissure is actually basically a junction like structure. So this is the case, and this is actually present in the white matter. So I declare it is the white matter anterior commissure. So This is all about the white matter. Next, if we move inward, then you see the gray matter, butterfly, or you can say H-shaped gray matter. So if we see that there are different horns in the gray matter. So if you see here, these are basically the two horns that are present here at the dorsal and the posterior side. So these horns are actually called the posterior horn. These are the posterior horns of the gray matter. Okay. Now, if you see at the anterior side, you also see the two horns like structure, and these are called the anterior horns. Anterior horns, or you can also say anterior columns. So these are basically the two posterior, two anterior, and now you see last is the two lateral. This point is important, and you also see the lateral horns in that situation. And keep remember that the posterior and the anterior horns are present throughout the spinal cord, but the lateral horns present at specific points of the spinal cord. So at what position they are present? From the T1 to the L2 level of the spinal cord, and S2 to S4 level of the spinal cord. So basically these two levels of the spinal cord you will see the lateral horn, otherwise you will never see the lateral horn on the other parts of the spinal cord. So this is the case. And if you see that this portion here is the portion, this portion, if you see, this is also a junction at the posterior side, at the anterior side. So you in the gray matter you will see the two commissure. So here is the commissure. This is the posterior commissure that are present at the posterior side, and here this one is the anterior commissure that are present at the anterior side, just like the white matter commissure. So gray matter has two commissure, posterior and the anterior. And last you will see at the center you see the canal, central canal, and in this canal you will see the cerebrospinal fluid. So actually basically this canal is surrounded by the ependymal cell. This is the basic structures of the spinal cord. Next, move forward. So first of all, we discuss the pathway, basic pathway of the nervous system. So here you can see, first of all, we see the stimulus. Then stimulus is received by the receptor. So after that, you will see the stimulus is received by the receptor, and receptor transfer the message to the sensory neuron, and from the sensory neuron the message goes to the central nervous system, either with spinal cord or the brain, and spinal cord and brain are actually formed by the interneuron, or you can say relay neuron. So this is the case, and from the interneuron you see the message transfer to the motor neuron. This is the case, and from the motor neuron the message goes to the effector. That can be muscles or gland, and ultimately you will see the response. So this is the basic pathway of the nervous system. So if you see that the other names of the sensory neuron, or you can say afferent neuron, that carry message towards the central nervous system, and motor also called the efferent, that carry message away from the central nervous system, which is composed of the interneuron, brain and the spinal cord. So this is the basic pathway. Next, if we see the spinal cord, the structure of the spinal cord, then here you can see at the center you will see the spinal cord. We divide the spinal cord into the different segment. So if you see that first component is the cervical region, and you will see the 8 pairs of the spinal nerves. So this is the case. In the first is the cervical region, and in the cervical region you will see the 8 pairs of the nerves. Okay. Next, if we move forward, then you will see the thoracic region, and at the thoracic region you will see the 12 pair of spinal nerve. This is the case. And if we move forward, then you will see the lumbar region, and in lumbar region we see the 5 pair of the spinal nerves. Okay. And then move forward, at the sacrum level you will see again 5 pair of the spinal nerves, and last is the coccyx. Last is the coccyx region, and you will see the 1 pair of the spinal nerve. So these are basically the different segments: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum and coccyx. And different nerves arise: 8, 12, 5, 5, 1 pairs spinal nerves arise. So total will be 31 pair. Actually 31 spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord. So this is the case. And keep remember, all these spinal nerves are mixed nerve. It means they contain both the sensory and the motor neuron. So this is the case. But if you see that on the both sides of the spinal cord, you will see the ganglia. Ganglia, it means the cell bodies, collection of the cell body that are present in the peripheral nervous system. So if you see at the both side, you will see the ganglia, and these ganglia are called the paravertebral ganglia, and you can say chain ganglia. So here are basically the different names. So these are basically the ganglia. We will discuss it later, how these ganglia form and perform different functions. So up till now, this is the spinal cord, and in that situation, if you notice that there are enlargement at the cervical region and at the lumbar region. So in that situation, spinal cord enlarge. So if I talk specifically, then at the level of the C4 to the T1 level, you will see the enlargement, and that is involved in the supply to the upper parts of the body. Okay. And at the lumbar, you will see, if I say specifically, then you see from the L2 to S3 level, you will see another enlargement. So these are basically the two, cervical enlargement, and this is the lumbar enlargement. Okay. Next, if we cut the spinal cord into different segments, if you see that from the cervical, from the thoracic, from the lumbar, from the sacrum, from the coccyx, then you see the different here, basically the different sections of the spinal cord. This section is from the cervical region. Okay. This section is from the thoracic region. Okay. This section is from lumbar. This section is from the sacrum, and this section is from the coccyx. This is the case. Now, you see there are different variations in all sections. If you notice that the posterior horn at the cervical and the thoracic, you will see these are the thin horn. Posterior horn of the cervical and thoracic are thin. If we move forward, if we talk about the lumbar, then they are somewhat rounded in shape, and at the last you will see posterior horn are basically the thick one. Okay. The important thing which we have to remember, that at the thoracic level and at the sacrum level, as we discussed previously, that from the T1 to the L2 and S2 to S4, you will see the lateral horn. Our basic main focus is on the lateral at the thoracic level and at the lumbar. Otherwise, you will never see the lateral horn. But posterior and the anterior horns are present in all, but the lateral is present at the thoracic and at the sacrum level. So this is the case. If we remind that nervous system, so if you see that nervous system divide into two: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Okay, peripheral nervous system is further divided into two. So here if you see that we divide the peripheral nervous system into two: somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. So somatic is voluntary, that is in our control, and autonomic is involuntary, that is not in our control. So further, somatic nervous system is further divided into the two: sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, that is involved in emergency, and parasympathetic, that reverts the sympathetic effect. So these are basically the different subtypes of the peripheral nervous system. So keep remember that first of all the starting will be the sensory. So if you see that the sensory neuron give message to the brain and spinal cord that are made up or composed of the interneuron, and from the interneurons you have the message move to through the motor neuron. Now the message divide into three pathways. It can go through the somatic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this is the basic difference. Now the message that move from the central nervous system divide into three parts. First is the somatic, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So this is the case. The sensory pathway is same for all of that, but the you can say motor pathway divide, or you can say efferent pathway divide into the three. So we will discuss all: somatic, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So before we discuss, we first of all know the basic difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So if you see here that in that case, if we see the sympathetic, that is the sympathetic nervous system. So if you see two things: preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. In the sympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron is small, postganglionic neuron is large. So this is the case. In the peripheral nervous system, you see the preganglionic neuron is large and postganglionic neuron is small. This is the case. And you will see the here is the case, right? And in that situation, if you see, preganglionic neurons are myelinated and postganglionic neurons are non-myelinated. So this is the case. And this is the we will discuss it later, so you can easily understand what is the basic difference between the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. So first of all, we will discuss the somatic. If you see here that this is the skin, and when the skin burn, let's suppose when the skin burn, you will see there are receptors present in the skin. So in the skin you will see the receptor like the tips of the neuron. So here is basically the receptor gain the message, and it carry the message towards the sensory through the sensory neuron. The message goes toward the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. The message goes through the sensory neuron, and here is the ganglia, and here ultimately it reach here. Now you see the when the skin burn, you will see the sensory neuron carry message. So here basically this is the sensory neuron that carry the message, and we know that the sensory neuron are pseudo unipolar. It means the ganglia are present here. This first portion is the dendron, second is the axonal part. Okay, and this is the this neuron is actually the different from the other normal neuron. So if you see here, message reach at the dorsal side. So if you see that this is the dorsal side of the spinal cord, this is the ventral side of the spinal cord. Okay. Now at the dorsal side, you will see the dorsal root. Here is basically the dorsal root. This is the dorsal root. So through the dorsal root, you will see the sensory neuron carry message toward the spinal cord. Okay. Now if you see here that this is the case, and if you see here that there are two branches of the sensory neuron. One, if you see that one carry message upside and ultimately reach at the brain. So this is the case. Now if you see that from the sensory the message goes toward the interneuron, or if we see that the interneurons are actually present in the spinal cord. Spinal cord and brain actually form of the interneuron. Sensory neuron, then the interneuron. Here is basically the interneuron. Now from the interneuron, you will see here at the horn, at the anterior horn, the message again move back through the ventral root and ultimately reach at the, let's suppose if you see there is a muscle and the message reach here through the ventral. Here is actually the ventral root. Ventral root. So message through the ventral root reach at the effector, which may be the muscles, and we pull the hand. So this is the case. And if you see here, dorsal root and ventral root. This is the case. And in the dorsal root, you will see the sensory neuron. In the ventral root, you will see the motor neuron. Here is the motor neuron. Right? And in that situation, you will see dorsal and the ventral root combined. And now, this is the spinal nerve. Spinal nerve contain the both motor and the sensory neuron. And spinal nerve divide into two rami, or you can say branch. So here you see at the dorsal side, you will see the dorsal rami. Here is the dorsal rami, and here at the ventral side, you will see the ventral rami. So this is the case. Why dorsal rami and ventral rami? Dorsal rami carry the message from the dorsal side of the body. Okay. Ventral rami carry the message at the front side or ventral side of the body, and all the limbs. From all the limbs, you will see the message comes through the ventral rami. So this is the case. Now, if you see this message come from the dorsal side of the body. Okay. Now, if you see here that this is the skin, and in that situation, here is the muscles. Okay. If you see here. Now, if you see that the message move from the skin carries through the ventral rami and through the dorsal root, because it is sensory neuron, always pass through the dorsal root, and here is the ganglia, and here is the last ultimately sensory neuron reach the spinal cord. Okay, this is the case. Now if you see, you will see the from the here you will see the another interneuron, the message goes to the interneuron, and from the interneuron you will see the message through the ventral root come here. Now it has two pathway, whether it goes to the dorsal rami or ventral rami, it goes towards the ventral rami because it has to supply to the ventral parts of the body. So here it's supplied to this one. So this is the case. If you see here in this dorsal rami, you see the both the sensory and motor neuron, and in the ventral rami you see the sensory and motor neuron. So this is actually, these are basically the different spinal nerves. Next we will discuss the sympathetic nervous system, like sympathetic nervous system in emergency, parasympathetic, opposite to the sympathetic. So if you see, like this is the skin. Okay. Now in the sympathetic emergency situation, when there is a burn, let's suppose there is a burn, and in that situation the message carries through the dorsal rami, and after dorsal dorsal root. Here is the dorsal root. Okay, now the message reached here, this one, and it has, let's suppose, two branches. One branch carry a message toward the brain and for the processing, and when the message comes here, now if you see and keep remember, and you will see after the processing, you will see the arise of the nerve from the lateral horn, from the lateral horn. So in the somatic nervous system, you will see the message, motor message arise from the anterior horn, but in the parasympathetic you will see the message arise from the lateral horn. In that case, you will see that this message goes through the ventral root. This is the ventral root. From the ventral root, you will see the message goes here, and this is the case. Now it will reach here. Now this is actually the preganglionic neuron. This is the preganglionic neuron, as we discussed the here. Sympathetic. Preganglionic neuron is short, post is large. So if you see, this is the preganglionic neuron, this is myelinated. So because it is myelinated, and when it adopt the pathway and when it pass through the alternative pathway, so it is actually the channel which carry the preganglionic neuron at the paravertebral ganglia. So this is actually called the white rami communicans. White rami communicans, because preganglionic is myelinated. If you see here, from now the postganglionic is arise. So in that situation, you will see the post arise, and it will move through the another channel, and ultimately after it will reach, let's suppose it will reach towards the lungs. So in that case, you will see the gray rami communicans, because postganglionic is non-myelinated. So that's why we call this channel the post. Preganglionic enter into the paravertebral ganglia through the white rami communicans and exit through the gray rami communicans. Okay, and if it reach the lungs, then in the sympathetic case, you will see the bronchodilation. Okay, this is the case, and you will see the breathing increase in the sympathetic. Okay, what about the GIT tract? In the sympathetic nervous system, the GIT motility decrease. Keep remember that the sensory neuron will remain the same, and if you see here, that same preganglionic neuron in that situation, this is the preganglionic neuron passes through the white rami communicans, and if you see that this is the preganglionic, and its fibers move through the another alternative pathway and move here, another ganglia, reach towards the other ganglia, and it will, you see the preganglionic. And if you see here, that after that you will see the postganglionic. So this is the same preganglionic branch move through another ganglia, and in that case you will see the postganglionic, and postganglionic provide the supply to the GIT, and the motility of the GIT decrease in the sympathetic. Okay, this is the case. Now this ganglia is a special case. This is the special case, and this ganglia is called the prevertebral ganglia. Actually, you see, prevertebral ganglia lies in that situation. So it has other name: prevertebral ganglia, pre-aortic ganglia, or lateral ganglia. So if you see, like the pre-aortic ganglia, as we see that this is the descending aorta, and here is the vertebral column. First is the vertebral column that is present at the back side. Next is the descending aorta. So here you see two things: vertebral column, descending aorta, and these ganglia are present in front, both side, at the front side of both vertebral column and the aorta. So that's why we call the prevertebral, or you can say pre-aortic ganglia. So this is the case. Actually, this is the case, and it will move in front of the both vertebra and this ganglia move in front of both the aorta and the vertebra. So this is all about the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, next if we see the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you see that here is the reception skin burn, and you will see the message arise through the dorsal root, and ultimately you will see two branches. One is for carry message from the processing, and in that situation, and after the processing you will see the arise of the, so here is actually the preganglionic, and in that situation it ultimately lasts the ganglia that is present close to the organ. So in that situation, in the sympathetic you will see the ganglia is present close to the spinal cord, but in the parasympathetic you will see the ganglia present away from the spinal cord. So in that situation, here is the post ganglionic fiber, and that supply the lungs, and in the lungs you will see the constriction in the lungs. The sensory will remain the same, but now if you see it, another branch will goes here, and you will see another thing. This is the branch of the preganglionic. Okay, now this preganglionic forms a ganglia that is close to the organ. So in that situation you see that this is the postganglionic, this is the preganglionic, and this is actually the ganglia. Here if you see here, this is the ganglia of the parasympathetic nervous system. So now this supply to the GIT. So acceleration motility increase. So in the parasympathetic motility increase, but in sympathetic motility decrease. So this is actually the pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. So these are, if you notice that the paravertebral ganglia are specific only to the sympathetic, but in the parasympathetic you will never see any involvement of the paravertebral ganglia. This is the case. So these are basically the all about the somatic, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. If you have any question, then you may ask in the comment section. Thank you.